All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's really great to be with you. My name is Sandra Soo-Jin Lee, and I'm a professor of medical humanities and ethics and lead the Division of Ethics here at Columbia. And I also have the privilege of directing the team's resource at the Irving Institute. And you can see here my contact information in case we don't get to everybody's questions, and you should feel free to reach out to me at any point about any of this. All right, so today what I'm going to be doing is to try to answer the question of what is team science, and to give you a sense of this new field that has developed in the last several decades. I'm going to try to make the case that we should care about team science and what it can do for us in terms of our work. And then I'm going to give you some resources and approaches in terms of what we can do with this field and what we're learning. All right. So I'm going to start with this quote from Elias Zerhouni, who of course was our former director at NIH. And this excerpt is from the roadmap from way back in 2003, where he says, quote, solving the puzzle of complex diseases from obesity to cancer will require a holistic understanding of the interplay between factors such as genetics, diet, infectious agents, environment, behavior, and social structures, end quote. And so you can see here quite the landscape in terms of the types of things we are now really trying to take into consideration when we try to solve this puzzle of complex diseases, spanning many different disciplines and different sources of data, different communities, different ways of understanding the human body. And so in service of that, there has been this new interdisciplinary field that has been developing. This is a quote from the National Research Council's report in 2015, in which they were commissioned to delve into what is team science. And here they state, the science of team science is a new interdisciplinary field that empirically examines the processes by which large and small scientific teams, research centers, and institutes organize, communicate, and conduct research. It is concerned with understanding and managing circumstances that facilitate or hinder the effectiveness of collaborative research, including translational research. This includes understanding how teams connect and collaborate to achieve scientific breakthroughs that would not be attainable by either individual or simply additive efforts. So just want to underscore what this new field is about. It's evidence-based, and it's interested in trying to understand how the various dimensions of teams really facilitate our ability to move research forward in meaningful ways. And I want to emphasize the last clause, which suggests that it's not simply a matter of adding expertise or adding with each individual team member, but rather trying to create something completely unattainable unless we work together in a collaborative way. So, definition of a team. What is a team? Here's one from Konslowski and Bell, composed of two or more individuals. So two, if you have two people, that could be a team. That they exist to perform organizationally relevant tasks, that they share one or more common goals, that they exhibit task interdependencies, meaning that they really must work together in order to do the work that they have outlined for themselves. They interact socially, and this could be face-to-face, but increasingly, as we can experience here, virtually. That they maintain and manage boundaries, and we're going to talk a little bit about what boundaries is referring to there. And then finally, they're embedded in an organizational context that sets boundaries, constrains the teams, and influences exchanges with other units in the broader entity. And so that last bullet is very important in that when we think about teams, we have to think about not just the individuals that are working together, but the ecosystem in which they reside. And depending on the nature of that ecosystem, and here I would say whether it's a department or a center or a medical school or a health center, that ecosystem can either facilitate or hinder the work of a team in very meaningful ways. Team characteristics. So we think about a team as a collective, and we can start to pull apart some of their dimensions, the composition of a team, their configuration in terms of various abilities, personalities, values that may be aligned or perhaps sometimes in conflict, diversity, and of course this is a term that's ubiquitous now, but it can have various dimensions that really can impact a team's functioning, such as demographic dimensions, geographic, where they're located, and different associational characteristics, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Proximity, and this again goes to the ways in which we interact. So how the team members are distributed in space and time. Space meaning, are they working side by side? Are they working in the same virtual space? Are they working within the same timeline? Are the folks that are working on a project's design coming into contact with the folks that are really leading the effort around dissemination? Oftentimes they don't interact. And then finally, the dimension of stability. And here we're referring to the team as a collective and how it changes depending on the entrance and exit of team members over time. So we can think about this in terms of a project that has gone through many renewals, for example, but asking some foundational, fundamental research questions. How is it that that team evolves? And to what extent are they retaining a certain core in terms of the team's characteristics and being stable over time? Okay. So these are silos. And as we all know, there is a silo problem when we think about collaborative research. This quote, health research traditionally has been organized much like a series of cottage industries, lumping researchers into broad areas of scientific interest and then grouping them into distinct departmentally based specialties. So that is how many universities are organized. Certainly our healthcare system and our medical schools, we are having strong boundaries around particular sets of knowledge and departments, and oftentimes those boundaries are very rigid so that collaboration can be difficult. Here, as you can see, the traditional divisions within the health research may in some instances impede the pace of scientific discovery. So team science is really building on the presumption that interacting across disciplines and breaking down boundaries between departments and bounded knowledge can really help us in terms of innovation and scientific discovery. Okay, this is probably a slide that's very familiar to some of you. This is something we want to avoid, the valley of death. So we have the basic biomedical research occurring. And then we have these translational moments where we're trying to get to clinical science and knowledge, and then ultimately clinical practice and health decision-making to alleviate the suffering of our patients. And yet we have these valleys of death where the ability to translate from one domain to the next relies on good coordination, communication, people being able to work together to be able to foster and nurture this translational continuum. In order to do that, team science would suggest that there needs to be crossing of boundaries and boundary spanning teams, and that these boundary spanning teams that are able to transect boundaries have better outcomes, including greater productivity and scientific impact compared to less distributed teams or solo scientists. So the idea here is that solo scientists working on their own aren't able to do or accomplish as much as teams that are involving different types of scientists and different modes of knowledge. Before we get to some of the empirical work that has been done in team science, I just wanted to define some of the terms that are in this field. The first is multidisciplinarity. So we can think about multidisciplinarity as occurring when researchers from a range of disciplines work on the same problem, but independently. And the intention is that they will come together eventually to combine their findings. But in a sense, they are working and using the methodologies of their particular discipline on some part of a project with this idea that in the end, it will come together in terms of combining what they have found. Interdisciplinarity is slightly different in that it involves researchers from different disciplines, but they are working together from the onset of a project, and they're really contributing to the design of a project. They're working on a common set of research questions, and they may be combining their various methodologies and integrating them in a much more combined fashion rather than multidisciplinarity. And then finally, transdisciplinarity, which is an interdisciplinary group that has perhaps an overarching model or framework that really transcends any one individual discipline, that they are leveraging and combining at the moment where they're even starting to generate the research questions from this more transdisciplinary perspective. And so that's, if we think about these different disciplinarity kinds, there's really a gradient here in terms of the level of integration of knowledge and approaches. So what do we know from team science? It's a new field, but we do have some lessons learned in terms of thinking about collaboration and the integration of knowledge across disciplines. And here I'm using the umbrella term of cross-disciplinarity. But what we have found is that cross-disciplinary teams produce more publications, and they tend to publish more than in more diverse publication venues than solo scientists and folks who are working purely within their own discipline. We know from research that cross-disciplinary teams generate more innovative products than unidisciplinary teams, and that disciplinary diversity of references are found to be more notably impactful with research citing disciplines that are far apart in their knowledge domains. For example, social science and chemistry receiving the highest relative citation count. So there, the point is that the further away the disciplines are, what we're finding is that those collaborations actually generate the most innovative and the most impactful research. Now, they also present, of course, the most challenges in terms of team collaboration, and we'll get to some of that in a moment. Gender diversity. So what have we learned from team science with respect to gender diversity? Well, we have found that gender diversity on science teams actually leads to better outcomes, both in terms of the team satisfaction in terms of the research they're conducting, but also in terms of publications. Women engage in more collaborations than men, perhaps not surprisingly. And that when we're assessing, what we found, at least one group of researchers has found, is that gender not only plays a role in terms of the teams that are conducting the research, but having gender diversity on the teams that are assessing that research actually matters as well, in terms of really being able to understand and to measure the success of a particular team. Diversity of professional rank. So what does it mean for more early stage researchers to work with more senior faculty, for example? Well, we find that senior authors, having them on a publication increases citation impact. That's not surprising. But we also find that lower rank authors, and here we're thinking about more junior researchers, as well as technicians or folks that may not be at the beginning or the end of an author's list, lead to higher levels of breakthrough publications. And that teams that include graduate students and postdoctoral fellows actually produce the greatest absolute number of publications. So diversity of professional rank matters. Trying to negotiate the author's list and what the rules will be around authorship order is certainly an important aspect of team collaboration, and one that needs to be negotiated once on a team. Okay, so team collaboration. We know from Mark Grenovetter's work, a sociologist at Stanford, that weak ties is extremely important and influential in terms of getting a job. And what we find is that, I'm gonna just see if we can mute. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. I think not everyone is muted. What we find is that weak social ties are actually very instrumental in terms of the formation of a team, but that strong social ties are the ones that actually sustain teams over time. We also know that the tie strength, the strength of a tie, can negatively affect knowledge creation, meaning strong social ties has been associated with limiting knowledge creation, and that actually the weak ties are the connections that can be most generative in terms of bringing in new ideas and knowledge creation. And what you need is really a balance, if you're thinking about teams over time, of both strong and weak ties, and the ability to understand what those mean in terms of bringing a team into existence. Related to this are the essential roles of brokers in the ecosystem. So these are individuals that are identified using measures of betweenness. So if you think about a network, a social network, we're all involved in our own professional networks. These individuals are the individuals that really hold a certain level of social capital in terms of how they function within a particular network. And research suggests that the feasibility of using these kinds of the kind of tools that would identify brokers can help us understand how various connections among researchers facilitate new collaborations. And so some researchers have found that brokers connect otherwise isolated individuals and help to diffuse innovative ideas through a network of scientists. So if we think about a field and how advances have occurred, we might look at who are the brokers who are bringing in these individuals who would otherwise be working by themselves into teams, and then being able to leverage that expertise to move ideas forward. Brokers lead to higher levels of scientific output and higher rates of scientific discoveries. And so to the extent that institutions or organizations can help identify brokers and be able to kind of identify the ways in which they are bringing people together, we can learn from each other in terms of identifying those key actors. Not surprisingly, another aspect of collaboration that's critical, and one which the organizational unit can play a huge role, is the built environment that can be conducive or create barriers to collaboration. So institutional factors such as the built environment, organizational structures, the resources that are available can have a direct effect on the formation of a team, the productivity of a team, and that we have found through the research that environmental and spatial factors such as buildings even can really stimulate cross-disciplinary collaboration and increase collaboration depending on the configuration of space. This resonates very deeply with me in terms of my previous work at Stanford, where there was really careful attention paid to the built environment. They have the luxury of having a lot of land, and so there were decisions about where to place certain structures, how they were designed, where were the meeting grounds in terms of the disciplinary landscape. So here, this is the Clark Center, which is right at the heart of the medical school, the hospital, the engineering school, and even the business school. So kind of right there in the middle, where people actually had to come together to work on various projects. There was this experiment, at least when I was there, in a program called Biodesign, to think about the different ways in which space could be configured to encourage and nurture collaboration. So getting rid of walls, allowing there to be a lot of desk space that a team could actually occupy the same space and be able to talk with one another and brainstorm ideas. In real time. Of course, this was before COVID, so things have changed. But nonetheless, this is just to be used as an illustration of the ways in which our space and the areas that allow for convening and those kind of serendipitous encounters with colleagues can really nurture collaboration in ways that space that is walled off from each other, or we don't have that opportunity to run into each other, can really inhibit it. Other kinds of infrastructure that has been found to enhance productivity, I mean, certainly the resources that are dedicated to cross-disciplinary collaboration is key. So making sure that people are funded to actually do this work of literally walking across campus and finding colleagues to collaborate with. Shared websites as a way of disseminating information and demanding in these shared websites the use of language that translates from one field to another. So finding common ground or vernacular in which different researchers from different disciplines can actually communicate and disseminate their information around their research. Data sets, sharing data sets and making that easily shareable. And then committed leadership. Obviously, leaders within an institution that are committed and believe in collaboration and the importance and willing to make the trade-offs necessary to allow for cross-disciplinary collaboration is critical for success. So this probably is familiar to many of you, just in terms of the stages of a team from inception to where they're hitting their sweet spot in terms of productivity. I think about it in terms of conflict resolution because it's helpful to understand that as a team forms, you might have this honeymoon period where you are coming together and you're really kind of catalyzed by the recognition that you have shared interests and that you found a particular set of research questions you're all very interested in answering. But then there is this storming period, or it can be a storming period, which is considered normal in the arc of a team's experience, where you become aware of some of the differences that might be at play in terms of your orientation to a particular research question, what you believe counts as evidence and rigor. It can be a realization of competing values and interests and the kinds of trade-offs that you're willing to make as one particular scientist. And so that period can be one of a lot of conflict. And it is a critical period when the resources that you might be able to leverage can get you from that period of storming and trying to reconcile these differences into the norming phase, where you start to develop practices that are allowing you to move forward. And this, of course, requires a lot of open negotiation and transparency about the kinds of conflicts that might be brewing within the team. And then finally, the goal of getting to that stage of performing, in which you have you're at a state of really being successful as a team, understanding the roles that people are playing, having the kinds of practices around communication that allows for information to flow freely and transparently, and then being able to move forward on the goals that a team particularly has. Now, with conflict resolution, of course, there is there are a series of different considerations that as part of a team you would want to nurture. And here, this is just to point to this dialectical relationship between managing conflict and creating conditions of psychological safety. This is well evidenced in the literature that there is this need for ensuring safe space where team members can express their views and offer criticisms. They can challenge each other's ideas, admit mistakes without feeling vulnerable or there being a kind of silencing effect. And that really speaks to this period of storming where you're trying to get to the norming stage, but in doing so, there needs to be some leadership in terms of creating that psychologically safe space. And part of creating that is understanding the various dimensions of difference that can that a team may reflect that could cause conflict. So what can you do to try to be preemptive or proactive in terms of addressing potential conflict? There are various tools that have been discussed in the literature. This one is cheekily referred to as the Prenup Agreement. So this really has been put forth by a couple of different teams that suggest that, really once you form your team, be preemptive in addressing topics that you think are going to be important for the team. So of course, goals and objectives, expectations for roles and responsibilities. So this can be questions around, how data is being generated, how it will be shared, how it will be stored. It can also mean having a frank discussion up front before any manuscript is in the works about authorship. And expectations or assumptions that various team members might have, depending on their disciplinary background, perhaps, or what is normalized in their discipline about authorship, and who would be first versus senior, and the order in between. This can also point to questions that junior members of the team might have about authorship and some of their goals in participating in a team for their own professional career. Trying to address these up front has been found to really help downstream in terms of avoiding some of the conflicts that can emerge and misunderstandings. Here included in this bullet is media requests. So strangely enough, or maybe not strangely enough, who is asked to give the quote in the New York Times about a particular project can be a point of contention, and there may be assumptions about who represents a project, for example. Making those explicit, or at least offering an opportunity to have a discussion, can head off some frustration that might generate conflicts and really thwart the ability for teams to be sustained over time. Part of these prenup agreements could be communication plans. So how a team will communicate internally, as well as how they will communicate with other teams, perhaps doing similar work. What are the expectations about communication? And then finally, of course, conflicts of interest in financial matters. So for teams that are potentially they have some IP, they may be trying to ultimately found a company that might be born out of a particular project. Having conversations about financial matters in terms of foundership, for example, or who owns the IP, or who will negotiate on behalf of the team with respect to IP, can be really important and potentially contentious if not addressed early on. Another tool can be the Welcome to My Team letter, which has been advocated by various folks in the field. This can be a way of onboarding. And again, if you think about the various topics that were part of the last slide, this can be a very explicit way to disseminate information to somebody who's new, joining a team that's already been well established. It also signals quite a bit of transparency on the part of the team, and it signals that that this team really values discussion about these various topics and understands that they can be a source of conflict. And so in many ways, this is a gesture to say, this is our team, and we have some practices and expectations, and we want to be transparent, but also an invitation to have discussion. So that should give you a taste of what this field has been generating over the last couple of decades in terms of studying teams, understanding what has worked, what has caused impediments to successful collaboration. And so what do we want to do here in the Irving Institute and through the CTSA is really to try to support our teams in leveraging the latest advances in terms of tools and technologies that help for collaboration, but also putting forward the science in terms of what has been found empirically about teams and how can we then convert that into our own productivity across the various teams we're involved in. So I have the privilege of working with this great group of people, most of all Deja Khans, who is our program manager, and these faculty members and staff that have come together, and they're really the resource in terms of trying to provide various advice and tools to the larger institute. So this is part of our renewal project in terms of really proposing team science as a resource, and these are the aims. Some of you are very familiar with the aims of our team science resource, but we're really interested in developing team science training and mechanisms throughout our various programs to also demonstrate the utility and impact of the team's resource across multiple diverse teams as a way of enhancing team science. So here we're trying to not only provide resources and approaches, but also study whether or not within our own ecosystem they've been impactful and useful. And then finally, to provide a mode of dissemination in terms of what we learn, not only locally, but also regionally and nationally in terms of the larger science of team science field. So I hope you all received the newsletter that we launched, I think last month or maybe earlier this month, that describes our team's team expertise and management support resource, or teams. And again, this is really a way to help various teams in different with different interests and concerns. They may be around commercialization, they may be about community-based participatory research. We really want to serve kind of the broad swath of various activities that are going on in the Irving Institute. And the way we've envisioned this is not only training, but also the consultation service that we have named Team Advice and Consultation Service, or TACS. We will be developing assessment tools to help us understand how team science has helped our various local teams. We have some initiatives around the Team Science Award, as well as creating a grand round series to bring some of the things that we're learning nationally to our local teams. Okay. And then as part of this, I thought it would be worth just explaining how this is envisioned in terms of the team advice and consultation service. And so what we're imagining and what we have been piloting is that research teams will make a request, and these might be related to a number of different issues, whether it's team composition and understanding how to bring together diverse team members, to team communication, how can we improve how we communicate as a team, to team synergy in terms of practices around kind of high levels of collaboration, and then sustainability. How do I keep my team that has been successful intact as we move to the next related project? What we'll do is when you request a consultation, we will have our resource come together to talk with you and or your team members and to do an initial assessment. So what is it that you're coming to us about? And we will provide a set of recommendations, again, going to the Science of Team Science literature for potential resources and tools. There may be, to the extent that there is expertise within Columbia that you may not know about, we would do somewhat of a matchmaking service in terms of giving you access to expertise that might help with your team issue. We will also provide different opportunities for increasing conflict management skills as well as project management skills. So there's a whole host of different things that we might recommend. You would then get back a preliminary report that would describe some of the recommendations, as well as a follow-up opportunity to discuss with us, what worked, what didn't work, what are things that still you need help with, that type of thing, as a way for us to learn from our community in terms of developing the resource and the various tools. And then this case report would then be stored so that we can start to see how the various teams are functioning at the Irving Institute over time. And we might then abstract some of the common challenges and write them up, of course, anonymously, not bringing in confidential details, but to contribute to the Science of Team Science literature so that others can learn from our own experience at Columbia. This is an early version of the tax intake form. This is just to say that we will start to use the website as the main way for teams to contact us. And so there's a very short form on the website that can be used to request a consultation. I will say that consultations can be requested on an anonymous or confidential basis, if that is the desire of the team member, and also a one-on-one interaction with one of our resource members, if that would be of interest to a team member. Just to give you a sense of what the resource would be doing in a consultation, really that first encounter and the first conversation that we would have is really to understand, what is your team? And these are various dimensions that we would look at just in terms of thinking about how your team is functioning. So everything from kind of the diversity of your membership on your team, to the kind of approach you're taking in terms of cross-disciplinary collaboration, the size, what are your goals? Are they aligned, or are there many divergent goals that are pulling team members in different directions? Whether your tasks in your particular project are interdependent, and to the extent that you have tools and technologies to allow you to maximize productivity in that interdependent relationship, issues around proximity and the technologies that might help with communication. And then also just an assessment of kind of team and organizational boundaries in general. And these are the kinds of questions we might be asking or thinking about. So, how compatible are the knowledge structures in terms of the disciplines that you are bringing together on a team? How strong are the cross-disciplinary reasoning skills of team members? So to the extent that you are engaging in interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary work, is it important that every team member understands the fundamentals of community-based participatory research, for example? What are the kinds of knowledge that needs to be communicated across team members? How well do collaborative roles align in terms of the goals that are in place for a project? Has trust been established within a team that allows for trade-offs and compromises and prioritization of particular goals for a project to move forward? And is there a technological readiness plan that allows for a team to address constraints and in terms of the abilities of participants and managers and the institution in which we are in? So these are common domains of our consultation service and places where we think we can offer support. So issues around conflict and disagreement, issues around trust among team members. How do we increase trust? Mentorship and sponsorship, depending on the approach that a team is taking in terms of bringing on junior members of the team and the kinds of experiences and advocacy that a project can provide for those team members. Leadership. Of course, every team is an opportunity to develop leadership skills, and what are the kinds of goals that are important for a team to be successful with respect to leadership. Team evolution and dynamics. So how can a team evolve over time? A team that's been established for many, many years. What needs to happen in terms of cultivating a culture of collaboration to improve team dynamics? Recognition and sharing success. So what do teams do to ensure that recognition is occurring at all levels and for all team members in terms of really motivating and feeling that there's cohesion across the team? And then, of course, communication. What structures could be put in place to increase communication across a team? So I quickly describe this consultation service, and so really it's the first point of contact would be with our resource at one of our team resource meetings. We would provide a preliminary report of recommendations, and then we would follow up over time for a full report on how those recommendations and interventions helped your team or not. This is just a list to say ISP has been a really important group for us in terms of our piloting of the consultation service. And I just want to do a shout out of these particular awardees that have engaged in our pilot of the consultation service. And you can see here it's quite a range of different types of projects that have come to us. What we found is that from our pilot, there are a number of very common challenges, and these will be familiar to you. The list on the left, just asking for advice on these various dimensions. And as a result, we have developed a number of recommendations and tools that we will host on our website as to address these common challenges around team science. I'm going to go quickly just so that we have time for questions. Some of those resources are authorship guidelines that exist in terms of how to approach authorship. There are some best practices, but again, this is with the caveat that depending on the team and the different dimensions of diversity, there may be alternative approaches that a team might want to take depending on the interests and goals of team members. We also have developed resource tools that build upon, of course, the IDP and other tools around establishing team ground rules as a way of developing expectations and practices. And I just want to highlight also one of the questions that have come to us is Columbia can sometimes feel like a very siloed place, and people who are working on aspects of a project that folks feel they should know about, or that they would like to form a team around a particular set of questions. This is a tool that we will host on the website, but it's available. The cusp networking tool, which provides a lot of good information that will allow investigators to identify potential collaborators based on publications and grants that individuals have received, and identification of areas of research interest. And I'll just end with one other initiative that I just wanted to let folks know about, is that part of the team's resource is also, as I mentioned, conducting research, and just wanted to let folks know about a new NSF funded grant that we have received from the Ethical and Responsible Research Grant Program on leadership and ethical and equitable design. So what I wasn't able to talk in length about is our real focus on DEIs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what are the best practices in terms of fulfilling goals around DEI in large translational teams. And this grant is an opportunity for us to collect data and to study empirically across areas of genomics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence, how DEI and equity are being integrated into team formation and team collaboration. And this is a partnership with UC Santa Cruz, Stanford, and University of Washington, and Columbia, where we'll be deep diving into these various use cases. So I'm gonna end there. These are some references that that I've kind of cited along the way, and describing some of the literature, and is available to you and on the recording in case folks have interest.